All right, so ready to take a deep dive into this AI index report for 2024. I mean, it seems like AI is kind of unavoidable these days, right? Every time you turn around, there's a new headline, some new breakthrough. It's exciting for sure, but honestly kind of overwhelming to keep up with.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And that's what I appreciate about this report. You know, it kind of cuts through all the noise and gives us this like snapshot where things are at right now in the world of AI.
Definitely.
And before we get too far into it, this isn't just for like the techies out there, you know. We're talking about AI's impact on like pretty much every aspect of our lives, from jobs to healthcare, even how we educate kids.
That's true. AI is everywhere these days.
It really is. So one of the first things that kind of jumped out at me from the report was this this power shift that's happening when it comes to like who's actually doing the AI research.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So get this. The report found that last year, industry labs like those at Google, Microsoft, you know, the big players, they cranked out a massive 51 significant AI models.
Wow.
Compared to just 15 from academia.
Yeah, that's a pretty big difference.
Huge, right?
Yeah, it really highlights how like the resources and the focus have shifted so much. You know, you've got these companies with almost unlimited data, these massive computing resources. They're the ones who are really driving a lot of the really cutting edge AI stuff these days.
So does that mean, like, are we going to see less of the kind of fundamental research that's been happening in universities and more of a focus on, you know, applications that are going to turn a profit?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the report doesn't come down hard on one side or the other, but it does highlight the potential trade-offs we're facing here. On one hand, you've got industry, they've got the muscle to really push the boundaries in ways that academia often just can't compete with. But then again, is that always a good thing? I mean, this shift could mean that research priorities get shaped more by, you know, what's going to make a buck than by that pure pursuit of knowledge.
It's true. I mean, it's like anything else. Whoever's footing the bill often ends up influencing what gets studied, right? Okay, so we've got industry flexing its AI muscles, but there's this other trend that's exploding right now. And I'll be honest, I wasn't totally clear on it before I really dug into this report. We're talking about foundation models.
Right.
And I feel like we hear these names tossed around all the time, GPT-4, Llama, but like, what actually are they and why are they suddenly everywhere?
So think of foundation models kind of like the base, the platform that a lot of these other AI applications are built on top of.
Yeah.
They're trained on these truly massive data sets, which gives them this really broad understanding of like language code, even images. And so instead of building a specialized AI for every single task, you can take something like GPT-4 and fine-tune it for things like translation writing, different kinds of creative content, even like generating music.
So it's like they're multi-talented, these foundation models.
Exactly.
And the report says the number of them like more than doubled in just the past year.
Yeah, it's been pretty wild.
That is a crazy pace of development.
It really is.
Yeah.
And one of the big reasons for that is this move towards open sourcing these models.
Yeah.
So instead of keeping the code and the data that underpins these things a secret, some companies are actually making them public.
So anyone can just tinker with them, build on them, improve them.
Exactly. And that's huge because it has the potential to like democratize AI development. You know, it levels the playing field and could lead to this whole wave of new applications and innovations from players who maybe couldn't have competed with the big guys before.
That's really interesting.
But, and this is something the report digs into, there's also a whole other side to this open sourcing thing.
Oh.
Because with great power comes great responsibility.
Of course.
So we have to think long and hard about how to make sure these powerful models don't end up in the wrong hands or used for purposes that are, you know, not exactly ethical.
Right, because just because you can build something doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
And speaking of potential problems, there's this whole other section in the report that gave me pause, and it's all about data, or more specifically, the potential lack thereof.
The data dilemma. It's something that's keeping a lot of AI researchers up at night these days.
So it sounds like we're getting to a point where these AI models are so data hungry that they might actually run out of quality information to gobble up.
Yeah,
Is that even possible? I mean, what happens then?
well, imagine it like this. Imagine you're trying to teach a chef how to make like these amazing gourmet dishes, right? But all they ever get to work with are ingredients from the same kind of crummy fast food joint. Eventually, no matter how talented that chef is, those limitations are going to show up in the food. Right?
Okay, I get it. You're saying that even the most advanced AI is limited by the data it learns from.
Exactly. And this report highlights this idea of model collapse. It's like if AI keeps getting trained on data that was generated by other AI, it creates this kind of echo chamber effect. The quality and the diversity of the information it's learning from starts to go downhill.
So we need to find new ways to feed these AI beasts, I guess you could say.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about the quantity of data either. It's about finding sources of information that are accurate, diverse, truly representative of like the real world.
So that's a pretty big question mark for the future of AI.
For sure.
But let's talk about what AI can already do, because this report dives into some seriously cool and honestly sometimes kind of freaky stuff.
Right.
There's this one graph in the report that really stood out to me. It basically compares how well AI performs to us humans on all these different tasks, and the results are all over the place.
Yeah, it's a great visualization. It just shows you how AI isn't this one thing that's either better or worse than humans. It's more complicated than that. It's amazing at some stuff, but still really struggles with others.
So give me an example. Hit me with a task where AI is leaving us humans in the dust.
One area where AI has made crazy leaps is image classification. Think facial recognition, or those apps that can identify any plant just from a photo.
Oh, yeah.
AI can now look at and categorize visual information with this accuracy that often goes way beyond what even our own eyes can do.
Makes sense. We're seeing that everywhere now. But what about the flip side? What are some things that AI just can't seem to get right?
One of the biggest hurdles is what we call common sense reasoning. You know, those things that are so basic to us humans, like understanding when someone's being sarcastic or knowing that if you jump in a pool, you're going to get wet.
Right.
Those are still incredibly difficult for AI to grasp.
So no robot comedians just yet.
Not quite. They can mimic humor, sure, but to really get it to create it, that requires this deep understanding of nuance and context that AI just hasn't cracked yet.
Which brings us to something I think a lot of people are worried about these days. AI hallucinations. You know, those times when AI kind of just makes stuff up and not always in a harmless way.
It's definitely a valid concern, and the report doesn't shy away from that at all. The reality is these AI models, especially these large language models, are incredible at spitting out human-like text, but they don't actually understand what those words mean.
It's like that game of telephone we played as kids where the message gets more and more jumbled as it's passed along. But in this case, the consequences of a messed up message can be a lot more serious.
Exactly, which is why researchers are working on benchmarks like Truthful QA, which is designed to test an AI's ability to separate fact from fiction.
Sounds like a test some humans should probably take too, haha. But seriously, how do we even start to address this whole hallucination problem?
It's a massive challenge. It's about feeding these models better training data, for sure, but it's also about finding ways to give them more real-world knowledge, more context.
And I imagine that ties back into that whole responsible AI thing we talked about earlier.
100%.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just build AI that can do amazing things.
Yeah.
We also need to think long and hard about how those capabilities are used, the potential biases they might have, and the ethical implications of these increasingly powerful technologies.
So when we talk about biases in AI, what exactly do we mean?
Well, here's the thing. AI models are trained on data that was created by us humans, which means they can inherit the same biases and prejudices that exist in society.
So for example, if an AI is trained on a bunch of news articles that tend to portray a certain group of people negatively, it might start to associate that group with those negative traits.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for AI developers to be really aware of these potential biases, to be super careful about the data they're using, and to develop ways to prevent those biases from creeping into their systems.
Because if we're not careful, we could end up with AI that reinforces the very inequalities we're trying to eliminate.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of responsible AI transparency.
Right.
Meaning we need more openness about how these AI models are built, what data they're trained on, the decisions that go into their design.
So it's not enough to just build a super powerful AI and be like, don't worry, trust us, it's all good.
You got it. The report actually introduces this thing called the Foundation Model Transparency Index.
Ooh, tell me more. The Foundation Model Transparency Index.
Okay, so are they being transparent enough?
Well, not really. The report found that most AI developers aren't giving us nearly enough information about how they build and train their models. And that's a problem for a whole bunch of reasons.
Like what? Why should the average person care about this whole transparency thing?
Well, for one thing, if we don't have transparency, it makes it almost impossible to identify and root out those biases we were talking about. If we don't know what kind of data an AI was trained on, How can we be sure it's not reflecting some kind of harmful stereotype or prejudice that it picked up along the way?
That makes sense.
And it goes beyond bias, too. There's this whole other issue of just understanding how these systems actually work. The more opaque these AI models are, the harder it's going to be to fix errors, improve their safety, even just make smart decisions about how and when to use them.
Yeah, it's like we wouldn't just get in a self-driving car without knowing anything about how it works.
Right.
Like, we need to be able to trust that the thing's not going to drive us off a cliff. Exactly. Transparency builds trust. And right now, there's a serious lack of trust when it comes to AI.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. The research landscape, these super powerful foundation models, the data dilemma, the ethical questions. It's a lot. I mean, it's both exciting and kind of overwhelming to think about.
For sure.
But let's bring this down to earth for a second.
Yeah.
How is all this AI stuff actually playing out in our lives right now?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the cool thing is, this report doesn't just talk about AI in the abstract. It connects the dots to the real-world impact on things like the economy, healthcare, even education.
Okay, so let's start with the one everyone's thinking about, jobs. Are the robots coming for us all?
Well, the report doesn't beat around the bush.
Yeah.
AI is definitely going to change the job market.
Yeah.
Some jobs will be automated away. That's true. But others will be created. And many more will be transformed in ways we probably can't even imagine yet.
And I think it's easy to assume that this is all going to play out in like Silicon Valley or something, but the report actually found that some of the fastest growing demand for AI skills is happening in places you might not expect. Like Chile, South Africa, places we don't always think of as like tech hubs.
It's a good reminder that this is a global phenomenon. So what are those in-demand skills? Is it all about learning to code, or is there more to it than that?
Well, coding is definitely up there, but it's not the only thing. The report highlights a surge in demand for data analysis skills, machine learning expertise, even something called prompt engineering. Prompt engineering. Okay, now that's a new one on me.
Right. It's becoming a really sought-after skill as we all interact with AI more and more. Basically, it's the art of figuring out how to talk to these AI models, giving them the right instructions to get them to actually do what you want them to do.
Sounds like it's all about adaptability, being willing to learn new things constantly.
100%. I mean, the jobs of the future might not even exist yet. So being able to learn, unlearn, and relearn that's going to be key.
Okay, so let's shift gears to an area where I think AI has the potential to do a lot of good healthcare. What kind of impact are we seeing there?
Get ready to have your mind blown, because AI is already revolutionizing so many aspects of healthcare, from how we diagnose diseases to how we develop new treatments, even how we deliver care.
Okay, so what are some of the coolest examples you came across in the report?
Well, one that really stood out to me was this AI called Synth S/R. It's basically transforming brain imaging. It can analyze scans way faster and more accurately than humans, which means quicker diagnoses and more targeted treatments for things like strokes, tumors, even Alzheimer's disease.
So potentially life-saving stuff.
Absolutely. And then there's this other AI, Immunosera. It's speeding up the process of disease detection by like 1,000. It can analyze blood samples with this incredible precision, which could mean earlier diagnoses and more effective treatments for a whole range of illnesses.
Wow, it really feels like AI has the potential to make healthcare more effective, more accessible, and hopefully more affordable.
Right, that's the dream.
Now, there's one more area I want to touch on before we wrap up education. How are schools and universities adapting to this AI revolution?
It's a mixed bag, to be honest. The report found that there's actually been a drop in the number of international students enrolling in AI programs in the US and Canada, which could have some pretty big long-term consequences for the global AI talent pool.
Huh. Interesting. Any theories about what's behind that?
Probably a few things at play. Changes to visa policies, the rise of some really strong AI programs in other parts of the world, and then maybe even the fact that there's just more and more high-quality online AI education available these days.
It's true, AI is changing how we learn about everything else, so it makes sense that it's shaking up the world of education itself. But what about within the classroom? How are teachers actually using AI?
Get this. As of last July, over half of K through 12 teachers said they were already using ChatGPT in their classrooms.
Wow, that's huge, especially when you think about how new ChatGPT still is. But is that a good thing? I mean, I can see both the potential upsides and the potential downsides of having AI in the classroom. It's a double-edged sword, for sure. AI tools have the potential to personalize learning, give students more immediate feedback, make education more engaging and interactive.
Yeah, for sure.
But then there's that whole can of worms about cheating students becoming overly reliant on AI, and this real need to make sure that kids are still learning how to think critically and solve problems for themselves, not just relying on AI to do the thinking for them.
It's a tricky balance.
For sure. We're all still figuring it out.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of AI. We've covered so much ground, from the latest and greatest breakthroughs to these ethical dilemmas, to the impact it's having on everything from the economy to healthcare to how we educate the next generation.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I got to say, it's both exciting and a little bit daunting to think about what the future holds. This AI Index report did a great job of highlighting both the incredible potential of this technology and the very real challenges we need to address head on.
Totally agree. It's not just a one-sided conversation. Not at all. And there was this one thing that really stuck with me, this idea of extreme AI risks, these potential existential threats that some experts are worried about. It's kind of a lot to process.
It really is. And while the report doesn't give us any easy answers, it does underline how important it is to be having these conversations, to be thinking critically about the potential consequences of the technology we're creating.
Because with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Exactly. And that responsibility belongs to all of us.
Couldn't agree more. So if you're listening to this and you're as fascinated by all this AI stuff as we are, I highly recommend checking out the full AI Index report for yourself. It's full of even more data insights, thought-provoking questions. It's definitely worth a read.
It's a great resource.
It really is. And if you've got thoughts about it, we want to hear them. What stood out to you? What are you excited about? What are you worried about when it comes to the future of AI? Let's keep this conversation going online, because this is something we all need to be talking about.